Where legends breathe again. Eld myth. There are stories that were never meant to be told. Not in the clear light of day, not in the sanctioned scrolls, not in the prayers recited by the faithful. These are the myths that dwell in the negative space of history, in the silence between the hymns, in the cold ashes of fires that burn too strangely, too fiercely, for the authorities of their age to allow them to continue. They are the echoes of what was forbidden, censored, hidden, or violently rebranded. They speak of a time when the sacred was not separate from the visceral, when communion was sealed not with wine, but with life itself, when the human body was viewed not as a temple, but as a weapon forged by forgotten gods. They whisper of priestesses whose voices were systematically silenced, of rites where possession was an invitation, not an infestation, and of deities so dangerous to the new order that their very names were scraped from stone and memory. This is a journey into the deep past, to the crossroads where faith, flesh, and fear intertwined. We are not searching for comfort. We are searching for what was deemed too powerful, too chaotic, too true to survive. We are searching for the forbidden covenants, the sacred anatomy, the silenced rituals, the invited spirits, and the gods rendered nameless. This is the archaeology of the suppressed. The thread that binds these hidden tales is not merely violence, but a profound, unsettling intimacy with forces of chaos, transformation, and taboo. They represent a worldview where the boundary between the human and the divine was permeable, messy, and often terrifying. A worldview that emerging structures of power found impossible to control. To cement a new truth, the old truths had to be dismantled. Their rituals were recast as heresy, their practitioners as monsters, their gods as demons. But myths are resilient. They do not die, they go underground. They fester in the collective subconscious, resurfacing in our art, our nightmares, and our deepest, most inexplicable longings. To understand them is to understand a shadow history of humanity itself, a history written not in ink, but in blood, carved not in stone, but in flesh, and spoken not in words, but in a silence that has lasted for millennia. Long before faith was a matter of scripture and sermon, it was a contract written in the only ink that truly mattered, the vital fluid of life itself. The earliest covenants were not abstract promises, they were visceral, physical unions. To share blood was to share destiny, to bind souls, to create kinship stronger than clan. But the most profound of these bonds was not between people. It was between the human and the divine. In the deep, smoke-filled caves and atop wind-scoured high places, under a canopy of stars that felt dangerously close, the first priests and priestesses understood something we have labored to forget. A God who accepts only words is a distant God. A God who requires your life's essence is a God who is present. Imagine the scene. Not a temple, but a chosen place of raw power, a fissure in the earth, a grove of ancient, twisted trees. The air is thick with the smell of crushed herbs, ozone, and animal fear. The only light comes from a fire that burns with an unnatural, low blue tinge at its heart. The community stands in a silent, wide circle, their faces masks of awe and terror. At the center, the ritualist stands beside a chosen beast, or in the most forbidden echoes of the tale, a consenting human vessel. The knife is not a weapon of violence, but a sacred tool, its edge honed to a cruel perfection. The incantation is not a prayer of supplication, but a call of recognition, a declaration of mutual need. We are of you, and you are of us. Our life is your sustenance. Your power is our survival. Cut is swift. The blood, steaming in the cold night air, is caught in a basin of stone or upon the bare earth. This is the pivotal moment, the point of terrifying intimacy. The blood is offered not as a bribe, but as a conduit. It is the literal mingling of realms. In some traditions, the participants would then anoint themselves with the sacred fluid, marking foreheads, lips, hearts, transforming their own bodies into living altars. The covenant was now in them. They carried the contract in their veins. But why was this practice so systematically erased, rebranded as barbaric, or sublimated into the harmless symbol of wine? The reason is one of control. A faith based on such a direct, personal, and chaotic transaction is inherently unstable. It empowers the individual who draws the knife, who chants the words, who feels the God's presence in their own pounding heartbeat. It bypasses hierarchy, scripture, and dogma. When newer religions sought to consolidate power, they could not allow the divine to be accessed through a personal act of bloody reciprocity. The blood covenant was too powerful, too democratic in its horror. So it was buried. The knife became a symbol of sacrifice, but the true reciprocal covenant, the sharing of essence, was locked away, surviving only in the darkest corners of folklore and in the human body's own, unshakable understanding that life and loyalty are written in blood. We are taught the body is a temple, a vessel to be kept pure, a temporary home for the soul. But in the hidden strata of myth, a far more radical and dangerous doctrine whispers, the body is not a temple. It is the altar, the sacrifice, and the divine weapon, all forged into one. This was the forbidden knowledge, that the human form, in all its frail, mortal glory, was itself a piece of forgotten cosmology, a map to forgotten powers, and a prison for energies that could unmake reality. The stories are fragmented, told in coded anatomical diagrams, in alchemical texts that speak of the interior stars, and in heresies that claim the flesh itself was the key to ascension. They spoke of nerve pathways that were not just biological but celestial rivers, of bone structures that echoed the architecture of fallen divine realms, of the heart as a sealed furnace containing a spark of the first fire. This was not metaphor. It was a literal, physiological theology. To know the body, truly know it, through extreme rites, trance states, or even controlled dissolution, was to know the secrets of the gods. The ultimate taboo was self-deification through physical mastery or annihilation. The atmosphere of these practices was one of intense, claustrophobic interiority. Think not of grand temples, but of sealed meditation chambers, subterranean caves, or isolated mountain huts. The air is still, thick with the smell of one's own sweat and burning specific, pungent resins. The light is minimal, a single candle flame, its flicker mapping the dance of shadow across the practitioner's skin as they sit in perfect stillness. The sound is the deafening symphony of the interior, the rush of blood, the rhythm of breath, the silent crackle of willpower being focused to a needlepoint. The goal was to turn the senses inward, to navigate the labyrinth of the self, to find the locked doors within the flesh and throw them open. This knowledge was forbidden for the same reason a monarch forbids the populace to own weapons. If the power to touch the divine truly resided within the individual corpus, then no priest, no king, no institutional dogma held the keys to salvation or power. It was the ultimate decentralization of the sacred. Organized religions, built on the premise of an external, judgmental deity and the need for an intermediary caste, could not tolerate this. The body had to be rendered profane, sinful, a source of temptation to be mastered, not a source of power to be unlocked. Its sacred geography was redrawn as a map of transgression. The rites that explored it were labeled witchcraft, madness, or demonic possession. The myth of the sacred body was not just hidden, it was inverted. What was once seen as a divine instrument became a cage of base desires, its true, terrifying potential locked away, leaving only a ghost of the truth in the mystic's quest and the artist's attempt to capture the sublime in human form. History is written by the victors, and theology is often sculpted by the patriarchs. Across the ancient world, from the groves of Anatolia to the islands of the Mediterranean, there existed a powerful, pervasive archetype, the woman as the primary conduit to the divine. These were not passive oracles or symbolic priestesses. They were technicians of the unseen, leaders of ecstatic rites, holders of herbal and astronomical knowledge, and the literal voice of goddesses whose domains were life, death, and the chaotic, fertile earth. Their power was direct, experiential, and rooted in the very biological mysteries that men could not access. The blood of menstruation and birth, seen not as impurity, but as sacred power, the same vital essence that once sealed the blood covenants. The atmosphere of their rites was one of controlled chaos. Picture a torchlit clearing in a primeval forest, the trees forming a living cathedral. The air vibrates with the rhythm of skin drums and the dissonant, beautiful chanting of dozens of women. They move, not in formal procession, but in a swirling, dynamic dance that mimics the turning of the seasons and the cycles of the moon. They wear crowns of toxic, beautiful nightshade and ivy. The smell is of crushed mint, damp earth, and the metallic tang of nocturnal blooms. The priestess at the center is in a state of pure enthusiasmos, the god within. Her eyes are rolled back, seeing not this world but the weave of fate itself. She speaks, and her voice is layered, resonant with an authority that is not her own. She pronounces judgments, interprets omens, and directs the energy of the right. This was sacred order born from apparent frenzy. Their silencing was not a gradual forgetting. It was a deliberate, often violent, campaign of erasure. As male-dominated, sky-god pantheons and later monotheism rose, the independent, embodied power of the priestess became a direct threat. Her ecstasy was recast as hysteria. Her communion with nature spirits was renamed consorting with demons. Her sacred pharmacology became witchcraft. The goddesses she served were demoted to monsters, or absorbed as passive consorts into new myths. The very spaces where she held power, forest groves, springs, cave sanctuaries, were desecrated or claimed by new male priesthoods. The most effective censorship was to transform her from a sovereign authority into a stock character of danger and temptation. The siren, the witch, the seductress. Her knowledge was driven underground, into the grimoires of the cunning folk and the suppressed lineages of midwives, where it was forced to hide in the language of heresy. The myth of the silenced priestesses is a gaping absence in our historical record, a silence that screams. It represents the severing of a direct, intuitive, and feminine line to the sacred, replacing it with a mediated, textual, and patriarchal one. The forbidden rite is not a specific act, but the very existence of her authority. Her story is told in the negative space, in the accusations of witch trials, in the demonization of powerful female figures, and in the lingering, subterranean current of the divine feminine that resurfaces whenever institutional control wavers, a ghost in the stone of cathedrals built over her sacred springs. In the modern lexicon, possession is synonymous with horror, a hostile takeover by a malignant entity, a crisis requiring exorcism and purification. But this is a revision, a defensive classification of a phenomenon that was once far more ambiguous, and often intentionally sought. The hidden version of this myth tells of the rite of invitation. Here, the temporary displacement of the self was not a tragedy, but a sacred service, a means of communication, and a form of divine communion so intimate it bordered on annihilation. The setting for such a rite was a prepared vessel, a chamber often circular, whose walls were inscribed with spirals and vortex patterns designed to disorient the human consciousness and attract the other. The air would be thickened with specific smoke, not to cleanse, but to thin the veil. The participant, sometimes a dedicated oracle, sometimes a chosen community member, would undergo days of preparation, fasting, repetitive chanting, sensory deprivation. They were not fortifying their soul against invasion. They were making it porous, creating a welcoming emptiness. The climax was not an attack, but a voluntary surrender. The community would chant a specific rhythmic call, not a plea for protection, but an address. Enter, speak, see through our eyes, we offer this vessel. When the presence arrived, the change was physical, total. The inviter's body would contort not in pain, but in the awkwardness of a new driver learning the controls. Their voice would drop or rise, fracture into harmonics, speak in languages or of landscapes unknown to them. This was the moment of truth. The community could now ask questions of the ancestor, the land spirit, or the god. They could receive healing, prophecy, or warnings. The entity, in turn, could experience the mortal plane directly, through nerve endings and beating heart. It was a terrifying symbiosis, a dance of mutual use. The danger was always present. The invited guest might overstay, might damage the vessel, might not be who they claimed. But this was a calculated risk. part of the terrifying respect accorded to the process. So why was this rite demonized? Because it was uncontrollable. It placed divine revelation in the hands, or rather, the body, of any prepared individual, bypassing the interpretive authority of a priestly class. When institutional religion demanded a monopoly on divine communication, the open channel of possession had to be shut down. The invited spirits were rebranded as demons. The sacred emptiness of the vessel was redefined as a moral weakness, a sin that allowed evil entry. The rite itself became a tale of caution, a horror story. The profound and complex exchange was flattened into a binary battle of good versus evil. The myth of the rite of possession shows how a culture's deepest fears can be manufactured, how a once sacred bridge between worlds can be burned from one side, labeled forbidden, and remembered only as a place of damnation. The most complete form of censorship is not distortion, but oblivion. Across the ancient world, as empires clashed and new gods ascended, a silent theological purge took place. It targeted not just the statues and temples of rival deities, but their very identities. This is the myth of the nameless god, the deity who was not killed, for a god is hard to kill, but unmade through the erasure of memory. Their cults were dissolved, their priesthoods executed or absorbed, their festivals overwritten with new celebrations. But most crucially, their names were systematically chiseled off monuments, scrubbed from papyri, and forbidden to be spoken aloud. To know a god's true name was to hold a fraction of their power. To erase it was to condemn them to a slow death in the dark of forgotten things. Who were they? Often, they were gods of specific, untamable forces, gods of chaotic creation, of unforgiving justice outside the law, of the deep wilderness that refused cultivation, or of truths too harsh for the state religion to acknowledge. A god of forgotten oaths, a goddess of merciful extinction, a deity that represented the void before creation, a concept so terrifying it could not be integrated into a cosmology of order and light. Their original myths were likely complex, filled with the kind of ambiguity that newer, more dogmatic faiths found intolerable. The atmosphere surrounding such a deity, even in their afterlife of non-existence, is one of profound, echoing silence. Imagine wandering the ruins of a temple dedicated to no god you recognize. The murals are defaced, the features of statues smoothed into anonymous blobs, yet the architecture itself feels wrong angles that strain the eye, proportions that create a subconscious dread. The air is still and cold, not with absence, but with a presence that has been stripped of all identifying markers. It is a hungry silence. You feel watched by the empty sockets of statues, and a name you cannot recall claws at the back of your mind. This is the prison of the nameless. The act of unnaming served a dual purpose for the conquering faith. First, it neutered the old god's power, as praise and prayer could no longer reach them. Second, and more insidiously, it allowed aspects of the erased deity to be secretly absorbed into the new pantheon. Their darker attributes were assigned to demonic figures. Their benevolent aspects were grafted onto the new gods, sanitized of their origin. The nameless god thus became a phantom limb of theology, a source of unexplainable symbols and unexplained taboos within the dominant religion. Their myth is the ultimate forbidden story because the story itself has been deleted. We are left only with the shape of the hole it left behind, a dissonance in ritual, an anomaly in iconography, a God-shaped shadow in the dogma that hints at a truth so dangerous it had to be made nameless, and thus unthinkable. Now let the weight of these stories settle. Let us step away from the specific rites and silences and into the landscapes that hold their echoes. Walk with me through a twilight world, a liminal space between the myths we have traced. Feel the cold, damp air of a primordial forest long after the drums have faded. The trees here are ancient witnesses, their bark like etched skin, their roots clutching the buried remnants of altars. The only light is the faint, greenish bioluminescence of fungus spreading across fallen logs, like the last, fading embers of a forbidden knowledge. The path is soft with centuries of leaf mold, swallowing sound. Here, in the deep quiet, you might sense the ghost of a procession, the whisper of robes that brushed these ferns when they were saplings. Or stand on the edge of a blighted heath, under a sky bruised with purple and indigo. The wind carries the scent of ozone and distant rain, but also a trace of ash and myrrh. Strange, weathered stones jut from the earth at unnatural angles, the last crumbling teeth of a geometry meant to channel forces we no longer name. The silence here is not empty, it is a held breath. It is the pause between the invitation and the arrival, a space where anything could still happen. Descend, if you dare, into the sunken canyon where a river black as obsidian cuts through layers of rust-red rock. The walls are pocked with cave mouths, dark and silent. These are not homes but thresholds. The air by the water is cold and smells of stone and deep time. This is a place of covenants where the vital essence of the earth itself, this dark water, might have once mingled with the essence of life under a star-strewn sky. The myths are not gone. They have seeped into the geography. They are in the shape of the land, the quality of the shadow, the particular chill in a certain gully at dusk. They wait, not in books but in places, and all places hold a memory. Look at the patterns now, emerging from the shadows like constellations in a night sky. These 5 forbidden myths are not isolated fragments. They are facets of a single shattered mirror, each reflecting a different aspect of a lost relationship with the cosmos. The blood covenant establishes the principle of reciprocal exchange, power for essence, a deal with the divine. The sacred body reveals the locus of that exchange. It is within the human form itself, the ultimate altar. The silenced priestesses represent the authorized practitioners of this internal-external exchange, those who knew the rituals to navigate it. The rite of possession is the methodology, the actual technique of opening the internal vessel to an external force. And the nameless God is the consequence, what happens to the entities and knowledge that fall outside the approved system of exchange. They are erased, made taboo, rendered unthinkable. The shared theme is one of dangerous intimacy. In each myth, the barrier between the human and the supernatural is not just crossed, it is dissolved, traded upon, or exploited. This intimacy is inherently chaotic. It cannot be easily regulated, taxed, or doctrinalized. It empowers the individual at the potential expense of the institution. Therefore, the process of forbidding follows a clear, brutal logic. First, sever the reciprocal bond, replace blood with symbolic wine. Second, demonize the locus of power, render the body sinful. Third, eliminate the practitioners, silence the priestesses. Fourth, recast the methodology as evil, label possession as demonic. And fifth, erase any alternative focal points for devotion, unname the old gods. What was left in the wake of this theological cleansing? A safer, more distant God, a sacred text to be interpreted by an authorized class, a body to be disciplined, not explored, a spirit world to be feared and guarded against. The profound, terrifying, and ecstatic experience of the divine was replaced with the solemn, orderly belief in the divine. The myths we have examined are the scars of that amputation. They are the phantom pains of a humanity that once knew how to speak directly to the darkness and the light, and to bear the terrifying consequences of being heard. Do not mistake these forbidden myths for dead things. They were buried, but seeds buried in fertile ground do not decay. They germinate in the dark, sending up shoots in unexpected places. Our modern world, for all its rationality, is riddled with their persistent, haunting legacy. We see it in the dark romanticism of our art and literature. The vampire, a being forever bound by a perverted blood covenant, seeking eternal life through the essence of others. The superhero or sci-fi protagonist whose body is activated or mutated, unlocking hidden sacred power, a direct descendant of the myth of the sacred body. The narrative trope of the witch, the medium, the psychic, forever struggling against institutions that seek to silence them, carrying the ghost of the priestess. Our endless fascination with possession and exorcism in film, a cultural obsession with the very rite we officially condemn, yet cannot stop replaying, and the countless cults and conspiracy theories that worship a hidden truth or a forgotten god, chasing the specter of the nameless. In psychology, we grapple with these concepts through different names. The process of integration in Jungian analysis mirrors the controlled invocation of internal archetypes, a secular echo of the rite of possession. Our societal taboos surrounding bodily fluids, death, and ecstatic states are the pale, institutionalized ghosts of the old, visceral sacred. Even our rebellion against rigid dogma, our search for authentic spiritual experience, is a subconscious yearning for the dangerous intimacy that was censored millennia ago. These myths are the deep code of our collective psyche. They are the forbidden programs that keep running in the background, shaping our fears, our desires, and the stories we tell ourselves in the dark. They survive because they speak to fundamental human truths. That power has a cost, that knowledge is stored in the flesh, that authority fears the ecstatic individual, and that some truths are too volatile to be allowed a name. The censorship did not destroy them, it only proved their potency. So what do these hidden stories, these forbidden versions of our past, ultimately reveal about us? They are not mere curiosities or dark fairy tales. They are diagnostic. They show the precise points where the human spirit encountered something too vast, too raw, and too real, and where the architects of ordered society decided it must be amputated for the body politic to survive. They reveal that our deepest fear is not of monsters or demons, but of unmediated power, the power that flows directly from the individual to the cosmos, bypassing all gatekeepers. This is the chaos that every institution, religious or secular, is built to channel, control, and ultimately suppress. The myths teach us that faith, in its most potent form, is not about comfort or morality. It is about a terrifying, transformative exchange. It is about putting your very life on the altar as both offering and bargaining chip. They expose the human body as the primary battleground of this struggle. Is it a sacred weapon to be mastered, or a sinful weight to be denied? The forbidden knowledge says it is the former. The dominant narratives overwhelmingly enforce the latter. This schism is at the heart of our enduring cultural anxiety about flesh, desire, mortality, and potential. Ultimately, these censored myths tell a story of a great narrowing, a reduction of the vast, chaotic, and participatory mystery of existence into a manageable hierarchical system. The silencing, the rebranding, the erasure, these were not acts of enlightenment, but of control. They traded a terrifying, authentic wilderness of spirit for a safer, walled garden of belief. We live in the shadow of that trade. Our haunted landscapes, our obsession with the occult in entertainment, our spiritual longing, are the echoes of that loss. We sense the absence of the old, dangerous gods, and we feel the ghostly chains of the covenants we are no longer allowed to make. The night is not empty, the silence is not quiet. Go to the edge of your perception and listen. In the space between heartbeats, you might hear it, the faint, rhythmic echo of a drum from a forest that no longer exists on any map. In the cold shudder that travels your spine for no reason, feel the brush of an invited presence from a rite you never learned. When you stare at your own hand, tracing the lines of your palm under lamplight, remember that it was once considered a manuscript of divine intent, its very blood a sacred ink. The names are gone, the temples are dust, the priestesses are ash, but the patterns remain. They are written in the DNA of our fears and our longings. They are the shape of the shadow that your body casts under a hunter's moon. They are the reason why a story told in a whisper around a dying fire feels truer, older than any scripture in a gilded book. The forbidden myths were never destroyed. They were simply relocated. They moved from the outer world to the inner world, from the public square to the privacy of the soul, from history to the subconscious. They are the uninvited guests at the feast of your certainty. They are the old gods, stripped of their names, who now answer to the titles of your anxieties and your most inexplicable dreams. So the next time you feel a pang of awe so deep it borders on terror, when you sense a vast, indifferent intelligence in the turn of the stars, or a whispering, chaotic vitality in the heart of a storm, do not dismiss it. It may be a fragment of a covenant waiting to be remembered, a piece of sacred knowledge encoded in your flesh, stirring in its sleep, an echo of a name not spoken for 10,000 years, trying to find its way back to a pair of lips. The stories are over, but the whispering is just beginning. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.